At Morixa Tales, we believe in the power of storytelling. Our scripts weave together deep emotions and dramatic turns to deliver justice where it is most needed. Experience captivating mysteries where the truth eventually shines through, leaving a lasting impact on your heart and mind.
When my 1-year-old son was diagnosed with Down syndrome, my ex-husband abandoned us and had an affair. 7 years later, he saw me at the hospital and mocked, "Where's your defective kid? Is he even alive?" I just stayed silent and smiled, knowing people rarely change. But in just one day, he would regret it when he learned that only the son he abandoned could save his own daughter. Thank you for being here. Before we begin, have you ever been underestimated because of who you love or the challenges you face? Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Quick note, this narrative includes fictionalized elements for storytelling purposes. Names and settings are coincidental, but the lessons I'm sharing resonate deeply. 8 years is long enough to rebuild a life, to raise a child alone, to convince yourself the past can't hurt you anymore. Long enough to forget the exact shade of someone's eyes, the hollow feeling in your chest when they walk away without looking back. Standing in St. Michael's Memorial Hospital on a Tuesday afternoon in February 2024, I learned that some ghosts don't stay buried. They show up when you least expect them, throw coffee on your white blouse, and remind you that the past always catches up. I'm Alara Mitchell, 33, CEO of BioInsight Analytics and single mother to an 8-year-old boy who happens to be one of the country's most brilliant diagnosticians. Most people don't know that last part. They see Leo's Down syndrome and make assumptions. They see his thick glasses, his awkward gait, and think they know his limitations. They have no idea what he's capable of. That Tuesday, I was at the hospital because Leo had case files to review. Once weekly doctor. Margaret Hayes, head of pediatrics, sent diagnostic puzzles, x-rays, MRs, lab results that stumped other doctors. Leo reviewed them remotely under the alias, the Shadow Genius. The system worked perfectly. Hospitals paid BioInsight for diagnostic AI access, which was genuinely good, but what made our 97.2% accuracy rate so impossibly high was Leo. He spotted anomalies that even the most advanced algorithms missed, a slight shadow indicating early pneumonia, irregular blood work patterns suggesting rare genetic disorders, brain scan asymmetries revealing tumors. He'd saved 47 lives in 2 years. 47 children who would have been misdiagnosed or sent home to die if Leo hadn't caught what everyone else missed. And no one knew he was 8 years old. I was standing near the 5th floor elevators checking my phone when I felt the impact, a sharp jolt against my shoulder, and suddenly hot liquid soaked my entire front. Coffee. Expensive coffee, judging by the smell. I looked down at my ruined white blouse, watching the brown stain spread across the fabric. "Watch where you're going," a man's voice said. Not an apology, dismissive, annoyed. I looked up, ready to tell this person exactly what I thought of their manners, and froze. Julian Ashford, 8 years older, still handsome in that polished corporate way. Expensive haircut, graying temples, tailored navy suit. But his face was haggard, his eyes hollow with exhaustion. He didn't look at me. He just adjusted his tie, muttered something under his breath, and hurried past me toward the pediatric ICU. He didn't recognize me, not even for a second. I stood there, coffee dripping down my blouse, watching him disappear around the corner. My hands were shaking. My chest felt tight. 8 years. 8 years of carefully constructed composure, and it took 5 seconds for him to reduce me to the 25-year-old woman he'd abandoned. I forced myself to breathe. Then I turned and walked quickly to the staff locker room. The nurse on duty, Sarah, a kind woman I'd known for years, took one look at my coffee-soaked blouse and handed me a spare set of scrubs. "Here," she said, "you can't walk around like that." I thanked her, changed quickly, and folded my ruined blouse into my bag. The scrubs were slightly too big, plain blue, hospital issue, but they were clean. I caught my reflection in the mirror, hair pulled back, no makeup, wearing borrowed scrubs. I looked like a staff member, a janitor maybe, or a cafeteria worker. I should have gone home, changed into something professional. But Leo was still here, and I needed to check on him before we left. I stepped back into the hallway and nearly walked straight into Julian again. He was standing outside one of the ICU rooms talking on his phone. When he saw me, he ended the call and turned. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then I saw it, the recognition spreading across his face. Slowly at first, then all at once. His eyes widened, his mouth opened slightly. "Alara," he said, his voice uncertain, is that you?" I didn't respond. I couldn't. He took a step closer, his expression shifting from confusion to something uglier. His eyes flicked down to the scrubs I was wearing, and I saw the exact moment he made his assumption. "It is you," he said, his tone cooling. "Alara Mitchell. I didn't recognize you earlier." He gestured vaguely at my clothes. "Working here now, cleaning rooms." I felt my face flush. "I'm not—" "Where's your defective kid?" He interrupted, his voice casual, almost amused. "The one with Down syndrome. Leo, right?" He laughed, a short, bitter sound. "I assume you finally put him in some kind of care facility. You were always too soft to handle that kind of burden." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't speak. Julian reached into his wallet and pulled out a $100 bill. He didn't hand it to me. He held it between two fingers like he was afraid to touch me and let it drop to the floor. "Here," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Clean up room 304 when you get a chance. There's coffee all over the floor from earlier." The bill fluttered between us. I stared at it. Then I looked back at him. "You haven't changed at all," I said quietly. Julian smirked. "And you have—" He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. I stood there for a long time, staring at the $100 bill on the floor. My hands were shaking. My throat was tight. 8 years. 8 years of building a life of proving I was more than the broken woman he'd left behind. And in 30 seconds, he'd tried to reduce me to nothing. But he was wrong. I didn't pick up the money. I left it there, right where he dropped it, and walked away. I found Leo in Dr. Hayes' small office, sitting at the desk with his laptop open, reviewing a case file. He looked up when I came in, and his face immediately creased with concern. "Mom..." He stood up, walked over, and took my hands. "Are you okay? You look upset." I knelt down to his level, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just ran into someone I used to know." Leo tilted his head, studying my face the way he studied medical scans, carefully, analytically. Then his eyes widened. "That man," he said slowly, "the one who spilled coffee on you. That was him, wasn't it?" He paused. "My biological father." I should have been surprised, but Leo forgot nothing. I'd shown him Julian's photo once 2 years ago when he'd asked why he didn't have a dad. I'd thought he'd forgotten. "Yes," I said quietly. "That was him." Leo was silent for a moment. Then he said, "He didn't recognize you at first." "No," I said, "he didn't. But he does now." "Yes." Leo looked down at the scrubs I was wearing. "He thinks you work here, as a cleaner." I nodded. Leo's jaw tightened, just a small movement, but I saw the anger there, the protective instinct. "What did he say to you?" I hesitated. Then I decided he deserved the truth. "He asked where you were. He called you. He used the word defective. And he threw money at me." Leo's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched into small fists. "Mom," he said, his voice very calm, very steady. "That man is not my father. He's just someone who shares DNA with me, and he doesn't get to hurt you anymore." I pulled him into a hug, feeling the sting of tears I refused to let fall. Before I could respond, Dr. Hayes burst into the office, her face pale. "Ilara," she said breathlessly, "I need Leo. We have a critical case, 7-year-old girl, acute heavy metal poisoning. Lead and mercury levels I've never seen before. The father is desperate. He's heard about the shadow genius, and he's begging me to reach out." Leo and I looked at each other. "What's the father's name?" I asked, though I already knew. Dr. Hayes checked her notes. "Julian Ashford." Leo's expression didn't change. He just adjusted his glasses, squared his small shoulders, and said, "Send me the files." I stood in that hallway later, watching Julian pace outside the ICU, his face haggard with desperation. He didn't know that the shadow genius he was begging for was the son he'd called worthless. He didn't know that the woman in the borrowed scrubs was the CEO of the company he'd pinned his hopes on. 8 years ago, he'd walked away because our son had Down syndrome. Today, he was throwing himself at the mercy of strangers, not knowing the stranger he needed most was the 8-year-old boy he'd abandoned. Karma, I was learning, had a sense of irony, and it was only just beginning. People always ask me when I knew it was over. They expect a dramatic answer, a shouting match, a discovered affair, something explosive and final. But the end of my marriage wasn't like that. It was quieter, more insidious. It started with a single sentence from a doctor I'd never met before in a beige examination room that smelled like antiseptic and false hope. I need to take you back to when I was 25 years old and believed in things like forever. Back to when Julian Ashford wasn't a ghost I'd spent 8 years trying to forget, but the man I'd promised to build a life with. We met in college. He was studying business at Ethelgard State. I was majoring in biology with dreams of medical school. He was confident, ambitious, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately became its center. I was quieter, more analytical. We shouldn't have worked, but somehow we did. He made me feel like I could be more than I was. I made him feel like he was more than he appeared. We got married 2 years after graduation. Small ceremony, just family and close friends. I'd given up on medical school by then, too expensive, and Julian's startup was struggling, so I took the job at Horizon Health Insurance, telling myself it was temporary. We'd bought a small house in Riverside District with a white picket fence and room for the family we'd planned down to the smallest detail. 2 kids we'd decided, a boy and a girl, 2 years apart. Good schools, the whole American dream. I got pregnant in spring 2016. We were both thrilled. Julian had just sold his startup, making enough money that I could finally quit my job. We'd already picked out names, painted the nursery, bought more baby clothes than any rational person needed. Julian walked around with this permanent smile, showing everyone the ultrasound photos, like they were masterpieces. The first ultrasound at 8 weeks showed a strong heartbeat, perfect development. We went out for dinner afterward to celebrate. The second ultrasound was scheduled for 20 weeks, the anatomy scan. It was supposed to be routine. Dr. Samuel Lawson was the on-call obstetrician that day. I'd never met him before. Something about the way he kept glancing at the screen, his expression carefully neutral, made my stomach twist. The technician left the room. The first sign something was wrong. They never leave the room during a normal scan. Dr. Lawson sat down, positioned himself so he could see both of us, and folded his hands in his lap. Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, I need to discuss something with you. The ultrasound shows several markers consistent with Down syndrome. Increased nuchal fold thickness, absent nasal bone, shortened femur length. We'll need additional testing, but based on what I'm seeing, there's a high probability your baby has trisomy 21. I watched Julian's face change. He stood up abruptly. This can't be happening. Not to us. We did everything right. We're supposed to have a perfect family. I reached for his hand, trying to anchor us both. Julian, he's still our son. He's still ours. We'll figure this out together. He pulled his hand away, a small gesture, but it felt like a chasm opening between us. You don't understand. This changes everything. Dr. Lawson cleared his throat gently. Many children with Down syndrome live full, meaningful lives. There are support systems, early intervention programs. Julian interrupted, "Can we terminate?" His voice was flat, clinical, like he was asking about a faulty product return. I felt something crack inside my chest. Julian, he wouldn't look at me. It's a legitimate question, Alara. If we terminate now, we can try again. Get it right next time. Get it right. Like our son was a mistake, already a disappointment before he'd even been born. I don't need time. I said, my voice steady. We're not terminating. This is our baby. This is our son. And we're going to love him exactly as he is. Julian finally looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, coldness assessment, like he was recalculating everything he thought he knew. We'll talk about this at home, he said, and walked out. That was May 2016, 3 months before everything fell apart completely. Over the following weeks, Julian became a shadow in our house. He'd leave early, come home late, spend hours texting someone whose name never appeared, just an initial, S. By August, I was 8 months pregnant and sleeping alone. Julian had moved into the guest room. One night in late August, I confronted him. Who is S? He looked at me with that same assessing gaze. She's a business partner, Sienna Cole. The way he said her name told me everything I needed to know. This was an escape route, a backup plan for a future that didn't include a disabled child and the wife who refused to give up on him. I need space, he said. This pregnancy, this situation, it's too much. I'm not ready for this kind of responsibility. I wanted to scream to remind him that the only thing that had changed was a diagnosis. But I was 8 months pregnant and suddenly terrified that if I pushed too hard, he'd leave before the baby was born. So I said nothing. Leo was born on December 15th, 2016 at 3:17 in the morning. Labor came fast and hard. Julian wasn't there despite my calls and texts. Rachel drove me to St. Michael's held my hand through every contraction. My son came into the world screaming pink and perfect and unmistakably beautiful. He had the almond-shaped eyes characteristic of Down syndrome, a slightly flattened facial profile, and the most perfect tiny fingers I'd ever seen. I fell in love instantly. My phone buzzed, a text from Julian, "I can't do this, I'm sorry." 6 words. That was all I got. I held Leo closer, felt his warmth against my chest, his tiny heartbeat steady and strong. "I will protect you," I whispered against his soft hair. "No matter what. You are not a mistake. You are my miracle." 3 days later, I came home to find the house empty. Julian's clothes were gone, his laptop, his files, everything. He'd left behind the nursery furniture, the baby clothes, everything meant for the son he'd wanted. That was the last time I saw Julian Ashford. He disappeared, taking our savings, our home, our carefully planned future, but he'd forgotten one thing. He'd left me with the one person he thought was worthless. The one person he believed would ruin my life. He had no idea that person would save it. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning exactly 3 weeks after Julian walked out. I was sitting on the nursery floor, surrounded by dirty laundry and empty coffee cups, trying to figure out how to work the breast pump while Leo slept in his bassinet. I'd been up since 4 a.m. with his feeding, and my phone had been buzzing with notifications I'd been ignoring because every time I looked at it, I hoped stupidly, desperately, that it might be Julian saying he'd made a mistake, that he was coming home. It wasn't Julian. The subject line read, "Ashford versus Mitchell, Dissolution of Marriage." The attachment was a PDF from Morrison and Sterling Legal Services. Petition for divorce, irreconcilable differences, division of assets, custody arrangements. Julian wasn't just leaving. He was making it official, legal, final, and he was doing it through lawyers like I was a business transaction that needed closing. My phone rang before I could process what I was reading. Unknown number. Mrs. Ashford. "This is Jennifer Martinez calling from First National Bank regarding your mortgage account. I'm calling to inform you that your payment is 60 days past due." 60 days past due. That was impossible. We'd set up automatic payments. Julian had handled all the finances. "There must be a mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We have automatic payments set up." "Ma'am, the account those payments were drawing from was closed in November. We've sent multiple notices to your address. There's also another matter. Our records show a second mortgage was taken out on the property in September 2016. That payment is also delinquent. Combined with the first mortgage, the total amount due is $120,000. If payment isn't received within 30 days, we'll have no choice but to begin foreclosure proceedings." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. A second mortgage? I never signed anything for a second mortgage. She hung up before I could say anything else. I sat there on the nursery floor trying to understand what had just happened. Julian had taken out a second mortgage on our house, forged my signature, and then disappeared. This wasn't just abandonment, this was theft, this was sabotage. I called our bank, the one where we kept our joint savings account with $85,000. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Ashford, but that account was closed in December. The funds were transferred out in a single transaction on December 10th. December 10th. 5 days before I went into labor. 5 days before Leo was born. Transferred where? I asked. I'm not authorized to disclose that information. The account was changed to single holder status in November. Only Mr. Ashford's signature was required for the transfer. Leo woke up, then his soft whimpers quickly escalating to full-blown wails. I picked him up, held him against my chest, and realized with perfect, terrible clarity, Julian hadn't just left us. He'd systematically dismantled our entire life piece by piece while I was pregnant and trusting and too naive to see what was happening. I called Rachel. She arrived within an hour, storming into my house like an avenging angel in a power suit. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. The email, the bank calls, the second mortgage, the missing $85,000. "That son of a bitch," she said finally. "Give me 48 hours. I'm going to dig into every financial record, every document, every transaction." 2 days later, Rachel called with an update. Julian and a woman named Sienna Cole established a limited liability company in June 2016 called Max Grow Wellness, LLC. It's registered as a nutritional supplement company, but they haven't actually produced or sold anything. It's essentially a shell. The $85,000 from your joint account was transferred directly into Max Grow's business account, along with the $120,000 from the second mortgage. Julian used your life savings as seed money for a fake company. Who's Sienna Cole? Rachel hesitated. I ran a background check. She's 36, moved to Ethelgard in 2015. Based on the timeline of their photos together, I think they've been involved since at least early 2015, before you got pregnant. Julian had been cheating on me for over a year. The entire time I was pregnant, he'd been planning this. "There's more," Rachel said, her voice careful, now gentle. I contacted Julian's attorney. He basically told me that Julian's willing to give you full custody of Leo. No visitation rights, no child support obligations. In exchange, you won't pursue any financial claims against him. And Alara, he threatened that if you fight this, they'll argue in court that you're an unfit mother due to financial instability. They'll say you can't provide for Leo, that it's in the child's best interest to be placed in foster care. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Julian was threatening to take my son and put him in foster care if I tried to get back the money he'd stolen. Can he do that? I finally managed to ask. Legally, it's a weak argument, but it would mean a custody battle, which means lawyers, which means money you don't have. He's banking on you being too broke to fight back. By the end of February, I'd lost the house. In early March, I packed everything I could fit in my beat-up Honda and moved into a one-bedroom apartment in Riverside District. 500 square feet, thin walls, a radiator that clanked all night. That first night, I sat on the floor with Leo sleeping in my arms, looking around at the peeling wallpaper, and I let myself cry. There were nights I thought about giving up. I whispered to Leo. I wondered, how could I possibly give you the life you deserve? I had no money, no home. No help. Your father had taken everything and threatened to take you too if I fought back. Leo stirred in my arms, made a small sound, and then smiled in his sleep. A tiny, perfect smile like he was dreaming about something wonderful. And something shifted inside me. Something hardened, but you opened your eyes and smiled at me. I continued, my voice steadier now. And I knew I had to fight. Not just for you, but for us, because you deserved better than a mother who gave up. I held Leo closer and made myself a promise Julian had taken everything, but he'd made one critical mistake. He'd underestimated what a mother's love could do. He'd assumed that the burden he'd left behind would ruin my life. He had no idea that burden would become my strength. He had no idea that 8 years later that same burden would become the weapon that brought him to his knees. My alarm went off at 6 a.m. every single day for 2 years straight. Not because I was a morning person, but because if I didn't get up at 6, I wouldn't have time to feed Leo, get him dressed, drop him at daycare, and make it to Horizon Health Insurance by 8. And if I wasn't at Horizon by 8, I'd lose the job that kept us fed. 2 years after Julian disappeared with everything we owned, I'd figured out exactly how much sleep a human being could function on. 4 hours, maybe 5 if I was lucky. Any less, and I'd start making mistakes at work. Any more was a luxury I couldn't afford. People talk about work-life balance like it's something everyone deserves. Those people have never been a single mother with a special needs child, $63,000 a year between two jobs, and exactly $200 in savings after rent daycare, groceries, and Leo's therapy appointments. I worked two jobs because one wasn't enough. During the day, I was a data analyst at Horizon Health Insurance, $45,000 a year, to sit in a gray cubicle and analyze medical claims, looking for patterns in patient data, flagging fraudulent billing, helping the company find creative ways to deny coverage. I hated it. Every day I came home knowing I'd help some insurance executive save money by denying someone's cancer treatment or rejecting a child's therapy claim. But it paid the bills, and it had health insurance, and I couldn't afford principals. 3 nights a week, Monday, Wednesday. Friday, I worked a second shift as a medical dispatch coordinator, 6 p.m. to midnight, taking emergency calls and coordinating ambulance responses. $18,000 a year for 6 hours of adrenaline and other people's emergencies. Leo slept at Rachel's house those nights. She'd pick him up from daycare, feed him dinner, put him to bed in her guest room, and have him ready for me to collect at 12:30 a.m. when my shift ended. I'd carry him to the car, still sleeping, drive us home, and collapse on my own mattress for 4 hours before the alarm went off again. It was brutal, exhausting, but it was also necessary. Because Leo needed things that Medicaid didn't cover. Speech therapy twice a week at $75 per session. Occupational therapy once a week at $80. Physical therapy once a week at $65. Every penny I earned went to Leo or our survival. I ate instant ramen for dinner most nights because a 12-pack cost $3. I owned exactly 3 work outfits that I rotated through. I didn't buy coffee, didn't go to movies, didn't do anything that cost money, and wasn't directly related to keeping us alive or helping Leo thrive. And somehow, it was enough. Barely. We weren't thriving, but we were surviving, and some days that felt like victory. The strange thing was the harder life got, the more Leo seemed to bloom. When he was 2, I started bringing work-home data files and medical records I needed to review. I couldn't afford a babysitter beyond daycare hours, so Leo would sit on the floor playing with his blocks while I typed away at the kitchen table. One day I was reviewing a complicated insurance claim, a 3-year-old boy who'd fallen off playground equipment and broken his arm, except the emergency room doctor had somehow missed the fracture on the initial x-ray. I had the x-ray file open on my screen trying to figure out if the fracture had been visible in the original image. Leo climbed up onto my lap. He was small for his age, still had that toddler clumsiness, but he was curious about everything, always wanting to see what I was doing. "Mommy working?" He asked, his words slow and careful. "Yes, baby. Just looking at some pictures." He tilted his head, studying the x-ray on my screen, and pointed with one small finger. "Bone broken," he said. I laughed. "That's right, sweetheart. Someone broke their arm. Very smart." But Leo shook his head, frustrated. He reached up and tapped the screen more insistently. "No, bone broken here. See?" He traced a line on the screen right through the radius bone of the forearm. I looked closer, and then I saw it, a hairline fracture barely visible exactly where Leo had pointed. The kind of subtle break that an overworked ER doctor might miss on a busy night, but that would cause serious problems if left untreated. My heart started beating faster. "Leo, how did you know that?" He shrugged, already losing interest, sliding off my lap. "I see it, right there." I stared at the x-ray, then at my son. He was 3 years old. He could barely tie his shoes. His speech was delayed, his motor skills were still developing, and most people looked at him and saw limitations. But he'd just diagnosed a fracture in an x-ray by looking at it for 5 seconds. Over the next few months, I started testing him. I'd bring home medical textbooks from the library, old editions sold for $2 in the discard bin. Books full of x-rays, CT scans, MREs. Leo would gravitate toward them like other kids gravitated toward picture books. He'd flip through the pages, studying images of bones and organs and tissues, and sometimes he'd point at something and say, broken or sick or wrong. And when I checked the captions, he was always right. By the time Leo turned 3 and started preschool at a special education program, I knew he had a gift. I just didn't know what to do with it. That's when I met Grace Patterson, the developmental psychologist who worked with the preschool. She called me in for a meeting 2 months into Leo's first semester. I went prepared for bad news, but Grace surprised me. She sat across from me, Leo's file open on her desk, and smiled. "Ms. Mitchell, I need to tell you something about your son. Your son is extraordinary. Leo has a remarkable gift for visual pattern recognition. His ability isn't just strong, it's exceptional. He can identify inconsistencies and patterns that most adults can't see." I thought about the x-rays, the medical textbooks, the way Leo could spot a fracture in seconds. "What does this mean?" I asked. Grace leaned forward, her eyes bright. "It means you need to nurture this gift. If you can find ways to develop it, expose him to more complex visual challenges, teach him to apply this skill, there's no limit to what he might achieve." I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. That night, after Leo was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with my ancient laptop and started researching. Visual learning, pattern recognition, medical imaging, data analysis. And slowly an idea began to form. I realized that if I could somehow combine Leo's gift with the right tools, if I could figure out how to channel his ability into something meaningful, we could build something no one had ever seen before. But first, I needed to learn programming, machine learning, data science. I was 28 years old, working 2 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night with exactly $200 in savings, and a 3-year-old son who just spotted a fracture in an x-ray. And I decided I was going to learn to code. Most people would have said it was impossible. But those people hadn't met Leo. They hadn't watched a 3-year-old with Down syndrome prove that impossible just meant no one had figured out how yet. The pandemic changed everything, but not in the ways you'd expect. When COVID-19 shut down Ethelgard in March 2020, I thought I'd lose everything again. Horizon Health Insurance sent us home with laptops and vague promises about job security. The medical dispatch center cut shifts. Suddenly, I was working from our tiny Riverside apartment, trying to maintain 2 jobs while keeping a 4-year-old entertained during lockdown. But working from home meant Leo could sit beside me while I worked, and that changed everything. It was May 2022, months into lockdown, when it happened. I was reviewing insurance claims at our kitchen table, my laptop open with multiple windows covering the screen with patient files and medical imaging and endless spreadsheets. Leo had his coloring book spread out beside me, but he kept looking up at my screen, more interested in the medical images than in his crayons. "What you working on, Mommy?" he asked, climbing onto the chair next to mine. His speech had improved dramatically over the past year, still slower than other kids his age, but clear and purposeful. "Just checking some files, baby, making sure everything looks right." I was reviewing a claim for a 3-month-old infant who'd had multiple doctor visits but no significant findings. Healthy baby, according to all the records. The family was claiming their pediatrician had missed something, but I couldn't find any evidence of misdiagnosis in the files. Leo leaned closer, squinting at the echocardiogram image on my screen. It was a standard heart ultrasound, the kind they do on newborns to check for congenital defects. I'd looked at hundreds of them. This one appeared normal, 4 chambers, proper blood flow, no obvious abnormalities. "Mommy." Leo said, his small finger reaching toward the screen. "This picture is wrong. The baby's heart has a hole right here." He pointed to a specific spot on the ultrasound right between the ventricles. "See the shadow? It's not supposed to be there." My heart stopped. I looked closer at the image, zooming in on the area Leo had indicated. And there, it was a small, barely visible irregularity in the ventricular septum. The kind of subtle defect that an overworked ultrasound technician might miss, that a pediatrician might overlook if they weren't specifically looking for it. A ventricular septal defect. A hole in the wall between the heart's lower chambers. In a 3-month-old infant, if left untreated, it could lead to heart failure. I felt cold all over. "Leo, are you sure?" He nodded, already losing interest, sliding off the chair. "The shadow's wrong. Means there's a hole." I sat there for a long moment, staring at the image, my mind racing. Then I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I contacted the family directly, suggesting they get a second opinion from a pediatric cardiologist. I flagged the claim for additional review. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got a call from my supervisor. I was sure I was about to be fired for overstepping. Instead, she said, "Alara, I don't know how you caught this, but you were right. The family took the baby to a specialist. Ventricular septal defect exactly where you indicated. They're scheduling surgery next week. You saved that child's life." I hung up and looked at Leo, who was sitting on the floor building a tower out of blocks, completely oblivious to what he'd just done. My 4-year-old son with Down syndrome had just diagnosed a life-threatening heart defect that multiple medical professionals had missed. That's when I called Grace Patterson. We'd stayed in touch since Leo started preschool, but this was different. This wasn't about developmental therapy or educational strategies. This was about what to do with a gift that was becoming impossible to ignore. Grace listened to the whole story, then went quiet for a moment. "Alara, I think it's time Leo met someone. Doctor. Margaret Hayes. She's the head of pediatrics at St. Michael's Memorial. She specializes in unusual cases, exceptional children. I think she'd be very interested in meeting Leo." 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting in Dr. Hayes' office at St. Michael's Memorial, watching as a woman in her late 50s with steel gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes studied my son like he was the most fascinating puzzle she'd ever encountered. Doctor. Margaret Hayes had been a pediatrician for 30 years. She was known for solving cases that stumped other doctors for seeing patterns no one else could see. And she wanted to test Leo. "I'm not going to treat him like a laboratory experiment," she told me, her voice firm but kind. "But Grace told me about his abilities, and I'd like to see for myself. With your permission, I've prepared a series of medical images, X-rays, MRIs, CT scans, ultrasounds. Each one has a specific pathology. I'd like to see if Leo can identify them." She'd prepared 20 images, different ages, different conditions, different body systems. Some were obvious clear fractures, massive tumors. Others were subtle early-stage cancers, minor bone deformities, metabolic abnormalities that would only be visible to someone who knew exactly what they were looking for. Leo sat at Dr. Hayes' desk, his legs dangling from the chair, his glasses slightly crooked, looking at each image on her computer screen with that focused intensity I'd come to recognize. He got 19 out of 20 correct. The one he missed was a rare spinal deformity so subtle that Dr. Hayes said most radiologists wouldn't have caught it without specific training. When it was over, Dr. Hayes sat back in her chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Wonder, maybe. Or disbelief. "Miss Mitchell, I've been a pediatrician for 3 decades. I've worked with child prodigies, gifted students, kids with photographic memories. I've never seen anything like this. Your son has a gift that could save lives, but he needs the right environment, the right tools." She leaned forward. "Work with me. Bring Leo here once a week. I'll send you cases, difficult diagnoses, unusual presentations, things that have stumped our team. Let him review them. And in the meantime, what are you doing to develop your own skills? Grace told me you wanted to learn programming, to build tools that could work with Leo's abilities. If you can create a system that combines Leo's diagnostic intuition with data analysis and machine learning, you'd have something revolutionary." I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt in years, not just hope, but purpose. That night after Leo was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop. I'd already started working through free coding tutorials, Codecademy, Free Code Camp YouTube videos about Python and data structures. I'd been stealing hours late at night after both jobs learning syntax and algorithms. Now I had a reason, a real concrete goal. I was going to build a system that could take Leo's remarkable brain and turn it into something that saved lives. I was 29 years old, a single mother working 2 jobs, still living in a cramped apartment, still eating ramen for dinner most nights. I had a 4-year-old son with Down syndrome who could diagnose heart defects by looking at ultrasounds, and I had a plan. 3 words: simple, impossible, necessary, learn, build, change. Most people would have said it couldn't be done, that I didn't have the education, the resources, the time, or the network. But those people hadn't watched a 4-year-old prove that can't was just another word for hasn't yet. Sometimes the universe delivers exactly what you need at exactly the right moment disguised as coincidence. In March 2021, I ran into James Rivera at a coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. I almost didn't recognize him. 10 years does that to people. But he spotted me first, waved me over to his table, and suddenly I was sitting across from someone who'd known me back when I had different dreams. James and I had been lab partners in college biology. He'd been the guy who could explain complex systems in ways that made sense, who saw patterns in data that others missed. After graduation, he'd gone into software engineering while I'd taken the insurance job. Last I'd heard, he was working at Google's Mountain View campus, building something related to machine learning. "Ilara Mitchell," he said, grinning. "It's been, 8 years? You look exactly the same." I laughed. "Liar. I look exhausted." He studied me with that analytical gaze I remembered. "What are you doing these days?" I gave him the abbreviated version: single mom working at Horizon Health Insurance, learning to code in my spare time. I didn't mention Leo's abilities. After years of people either not believing me or treating my son like a curiosity, I'd learned to be careful about who I told. But James asked the question that changed everything. "You said you have a son. How old?" 5. "Leo. He has Down syndrome." I waited for the usual response, the sympathetic head tilt, the careful platitudes. Instead, James leaned forward, interested. "That must be challenging. How's he doing?" Something about the genuine curiosity in his voice made me decide to trust him. Actually, he's extraordinary. He can look at medical imaging, X-rays, MRs, ultrasounds, and spot abnormalities that trained radiologists miss. James blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" So I told him. About the fracture when Leo was 3, the VSD diagnosis at 4, the test with Dr. Hayes where he'd gotten 19 out of 20 correct. About how I was trying to learn Python and machine learning because I wanted to build something that could harness Leo's abilities. When I finished, James was staring at me like I'd just told him I'd discovered a new element. "Ilara, do you understand what you're describing? That's not just remarkable, that's revolutionary. Computer vision A, I struggles with the exact kind of subtle pattern recognition you're talking about. If Leo can actually do what you say..." He pulled out his phone. "Can I meet him?" 2 hours later, James was sitting on my apartment floor with Leo, his laptop open between them, showing my son a series of medical images he'd pulled from publicly available medical databases. 10 images, complex cases, subtle pathologies, the kind of diagnostic puzzles that would take a radiologist several minutes each to analyze. Leo looked at each one for maybe 90 seconds, pointed out the abnormality, and moved on to the next. 10 out of 10 correct. 15 minutes total. James looked at me, then at Leo, then back at me. "This is insane. Ilara, this is actually insane. Do you know what you have here? A 5-year-old who's really good at spotting patterns." No. James was talking fast now the way he used to when he got excited about an idea in class. "You have the missing piece that every diagnostic AI system in the world is trying to develop. Machine learning is great at processing large data sets, but it struggles with edge cases, with subtle variations, with the kind of intuitive leaps that human experts make. Leo can do what the algorithms can't. He can see what shouldn't be there. If we combine his diagnostic ability with machine learning use, AI, to handle the routine cases and flag the difficult ones for human review, with Leo as the human element, we could build something that's more accurate than either humans or machines alone. A hybrid system. Human-in-the-loop validation, but with someone who's better than most trained radiologists." I asked carefully. James stopped pacing. "I want in. Whatever you're building, I want to help build it. This could save thousands of lives, Ilara. Maybe more." I should have been skeptical, but I'd learned something over the past 5 years. When someone sees Leo's potential instead of his diagnosis, you don't question it. You say yes. "I don't have much money," I warned him. "Maybe 30,000 in savings. That's 5 years of working 2 jobs and eating ramen." "I have 20,000 I can put in. That's enough to get started. File the LLC, build a basic product, start talking to hospitals. We'll need a name. Something that captures what we're doing, medical data analysis with human insight. BioInsight. BioInsight, I said. BioInsight Analytics. Over the next 3 months, James and I built the foundation of what would become our company. He gave notice that Google moved back to Ethelgard, and we set up shop in his apartment because it was bigger than mine. We filed paperwork to establish BioInsight Analytics as an LLC. We built wireframes for a diagnostic platform. We wrote algorithms for image processing and patient data analysis. And we figured out how to integrate Leo. He couldn't be listed as an employee. He was 5 years old. He couldn't be publicly acknowledged child labor laws, medical licensing regulations, the whole complicated mess of how you credential a kindergartner as a medical consultant. So we created a system where difficult cases would be flagged for expert human review by an anonymous consultant. Dr. Hayes loved it. She became our first partner, agreeing to send us cases from St. Michael's Memorial on a trial basis. Other hospitals could access our AI platform for image analysis, but the real value, the cases where Leo's insight made the difference, would be handled through our premium service. By December 2021, I'd given notice at Horizon Health Insurance. After 6 years of processing claims and helping insurance companies find reasons to deny coverage, I was done. BioInsight wasn't profitable yet. We were living on our startup capital and the small amount Dr. Hayes was paying us for consultations, but it was real. On my last day at Horizon, I cleaned out my cubicle and walked out of that building knowing I'd never have to come back. I'd spent my 20s in that gray maze analyzing data I didn't care about, helping a system I didn't believe in. Now I was 30 years old and I was finally doing something that mattered. That night, Leo helped me pack up my office supplies from where I'd been working at home. He was fascinated by the box of documents I was preparing to shred. No more insurance job, Mommy. No more insurance job, baby. Now I work with you. We're going to help people together. Leo looked up at me with those bright, intelligent eyes that so many people underestimated. We're going to help people get better. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to help a lot of people get better. He smiled, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but certainty. We had $50,000, a 5-year-old genius who was about to start kindergarten, and a business plan that most venture capitalists would laugh at. We had a Google engineer who'd walked away from stock options to build something meaningful, and a pediatrician who was willing to bet her reputation on a child she barely knew. Most people would call that crazy, reckless, irresponsible. But I called it a plan. And in 2022, that plan was about to change everything. By the time January 2022 arrived, I had already burned through 3 legal pads filled with notes, spreadsheets, and contingency plans. James and I had spent December finalizing the prototype, and now we stood in a cramped 500-square-foot office in Riverside, the same neighborhood where I'd once lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, with Leo barely scraping by. The irony wasn't lost on me. This time, though, I wasn't here because I had no choice. I was here because I chose to build something. The office smelled like fresh paint and ambition. James had set up 2 desks, a whiteboard covered in algorithm diagrams, and a small corner where Leo could sit with his books and puzzles. We'd hired 2 part-time engineers, both fresh out of grad school, eager and hungry, and I'd officially registered BioInsight Analytics, LLC, with the state of Ethelgard. $50,000 in seed capital. $30,000 from my savings, scraped together from years of double shifts and careful budgeting. $20,000 from James, who'd liquidated stock options from his Google days. Welcome to BioInsight, James said, grinning as he handed me a cheap foam cup of coffee. CEO. I laughed, though my hands were shaking. I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. None of us do, he said. That's the fun part. The product was called BioInsight Diagnostic Suite, an AI-powered platform that analyzed medical images, X-rays, MRIs, CT scans. But what made it different from the dozens of other medical AI startups flooding the market was one feature James and I had built in from the start: human-in-the-loop validation. Every diagnosis generated by the AI was reviewed by a consulting specialist before it was sent to the hospital. The hospitals loved it. It gave them confidence. What they didn't know was that the consulting specialist was a 6-year-old boy who could spot a pulmonary embolism faster than most radiologists. Leo sat cross-legged on a beanbag chair in the corner, flipping through a picture book about the solar system. He looked up at me and smiled. "Mommy, when do we start?" "Soon, sweetheart," I said. "Very soon." By June, we had our first contract. Dr. Margaret Hayes had been instrumental. She'd been working with Leo since he was 4, and she believed in him not just as a curious child, but as someone with a genuine gift. When I told her about BioInsight, she didn't hesitate. She brought the proposal to the board of St. Michael's Memorial Hospital, and after weeks of negotiation skepticism and a live demo that left 3 senior radiologists speechless, they agreed to a 6-month pilot program. $200,000, 6 months. One condition, BioInsight had to achieve a diagnostic accuracy rate of at least 95%. I signed the contract in Dr. Hayes' office, my hand trembling as I wrote my name. James stood beside me, arms crossed, trying to look calm. Leo was at school, oblivious to the fact that his entire future and mine hinged on the next 6 months. "You've got this," Dr. Hayes said, shaking my hand. "I've seen what Leo can do. The world just needs to catch up." The first 3 months were a blur. Hospitals sent us cases, hundreds of them. The AI flagged anomalies, highlighted patterns, suggested diagnoses. And then Leo reviewed them. He worked at home, sitting at a small desk James had built for him, a second monitor angled, so I could see what he was looking at. Every evening after school, he'd pull up the queue of images waiting for him. He never complained. He never seemed overwhelmed. He just worked. "Mommy, this one has fluid in the lungs," he'd say, pointing at an X-ray. "And this one, see the shadow, that's cancer." I'd send his notes back to the hospital, anonymized and formatted to look like they came from a senior diagnostician. The hospitals never questioned it. Why would they? The accuracy rate after 3 months was 97.2%. St. Michael's renewed the contract, 2 years, $800,000. By September, Leo had a nickname. The hospitals didn't know his real name, of course. To them, he was the Shadow Genius, a mysterious consultant who never showed his face, never attended meetings, but somehow delivered flawless diagnoses within minutes. Complex cases that stumped entire medical teams would land on our platform, and within 10 to 20 minutes, a detailed analysis would come back. The hospitals paid $5,000 per consultation. Leo handled 2 to 3 cases per week. He was 6 years old. He still watched cartoons before bed. He still needed help tying his shoes. But when he sat in front of that screen, he was something else entirely. One evening in late September, after Leo had gone to bed, I stood in the tiny office and stared at the whiteboard. James had written the numbers in red marker 15 cases, 15 successful outcomes, $75,000 in consulting fees. "We did it," James said quietly, standing beside me. I nodded, but I couldn't speak. 8 years ago, Julian had called Leo a genetic defect. He'd walked away because he thought our son was worthless. And now that same boy, the one Julian had abandoned, was saving lives. "Alara," James said. "You okay?" I wiped my eyes and smiled. "Yeah, I'm okay." But I wasn't just okay. I was vindicated. I was proud. And I was just getting started. By the time Leo turned 6, he'd consulted on 15 cases, all of them successful. Doctors across Ethelgard were talking about the Shadow Genius, a consultant who never missed, never hesitated, never failed. They had no idea that the genius behind the screen was a first grader who still asked me to read him bedtime stories, and I wasn't about to tell them. The first year of BioInsight's existence had been a sprint. The second year felt like flight. By early 2023, we'd moved from survival mode to something I'd never experienced before: success. Real, undeniable, measurable success. The kind that showed up in bank statements, hiring offers, and emails from hospital executives who wanted to partner with us. James and I had expanded the team to 15 employees, engineers, data analysts, a marketing coordinator, and even a part-time HR consultant who helped us navigate the chaos of rapid growth. Our cramped Riverside office had been replaced by a sleek, modern space in Midtown Ethelgard, with glass walls, standing desks, and a small room in the back where Leo could work in private. My salary had jumped to somewhere between $500,000 and $800,000 a year, depending on quarterly performance. It was a number I still couldn't wrap my head around. 7 years ago, I'd been earning $63,000 working 2 jobs, counting every dollar, every meal, every gallon of gas. Now I was signing checks and approving budgets and sitting in meetings with hospital CFOs who treated me like an equal. But the real story wasn't me, it was Leo. By the time he turned 7, he'd reviewed 47 rare case diagnoses, complex high-stakes medical puzzles that even the best specialists struggled with. Pediatric cancers, autoimmune disorders, congenital heart defects that didn't show up on standard imaging. His accuracy rate on these cases was 94%. Not because he was getting worse, if anything he was sharper than ever, but because the cases we were handling now were harder. Hospitals were sending us their toughest problems, the ones where lives hung in the balance and traditional diagnostics had failed. And Leo kept solving them. The medical community didn't know his name, but they knew his legend. The shadow genius had become something of a myth. An anonymous consultant who worked through BioInsight, never attended conferences, never published papers, but somehow delivered insights that saved lives. Some doctors speculated he was a reclusive radiologist who'd retired from clinical practice. Others thought he was a team of specialists working under one pseudonym. A few joked that he was an AI that had gained sentience. None of them guessed the truth that he was a 7-year-old boy who still needed help reaching the top shelf in the kitchen. One afternoon in March, I stood in the doorway of Leo's workspace and watched him study a series of MRI scans on his monitor. He was sitting cross-legged in his chair wearing his favorite dinosaur t-shirt, a half-eaten granola bar on the desk beside him. On the screen was the brain of a 4-year-old girl in Ohio. The hospital had flagged an abnormality, but couldn't determine if it was a tumor, an infection, or a vascular malformation. They'd sent it to us as a last resort. Leo tilted his head, zoomed in on a section of the scan, and tapped the screen with his finger. "Mommy," he said, not looking away from the monitor. "This isn't a tumor, it's a blood vessel. See how it branches here? It's an AVM arteriovenous malformation. They need to operate soon or it could rupture." I walked over, looked at the scan, and saw exactly what he was describing. I didn't have his gift, but I'd learned enough over the years to recognize patterns. He was right. He was always right. "Good work, sweetheart," I said, ruffling his hair. "I'll send your notes to the hospital." He nodded, already moving on to the next case. That girl in Ohio had surgery 2 weeks later. The AVM was removed successfully. She went home a month after that, healthy and whole. Her parents never knew that the consultant who saved her life was younger than their daughter. By June, I'd saved enough to do something I never thought possible. I bought a house. Not an apartment. Not a rental. A house. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a backyard with a wooden fence, and an oak tree that had been there for decades. It was in Oakmont Heights, one of the nicer neighborhoods in Ethelgard quiet streets, good schools, families who didn't have to choose between groceries and electricity. The asking price was $650,000. I paid it in full. The day we moved in, Leo ran through the empty rooms, his footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. "Mommy, which room is mine?" he called from upstairs. "Whichever one you want," I called back. He chose the one with the big window overlooking the backyard. James helped me set up his desk, his monitors, his shelves of medical textbooks and picture books. By evening, the house smelled like fresh paint and takeout pizza, and Leo was asleep on the couch, exhausted from exploring. I stood in the doorway of his new room and cried. 6 years ago, we'd lost everything. The house Julian and I had bought together, the savings we'd built, the future I'd imagined. I'd moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in Riverside with a newborn baby, no money and no plan beyond survival. I'd worked 2 jobs, slept 4 hours a night, and wondered if I'd ever be able to give my son the life he deserved. And now here we were, a house with a backyard, a company that was thriving, a son who was extraordinary in every possible way. I did this, I thought. I did this without Julian. I did this for us. In November, Rachel called. I hadn't heard from her in months. She'd been busy with a high-profile case involving corporate fraud, and I'd been buried in work. But when her name flashed on my phone one Tuesday evening, I answered immediately. "Ilara," she said, and I could hear the tension in her voice. "I need to tell you something. Julian Ashford is in the news." I froze. I hadn't heard that name in years. Not out loud. Not from someone else's mouth. What happened? I asked, my voice flat. His company, MaxGrow Wellness. It's being investigated by the FDA. Apparently, several families have reported that their kids got sick after using MaxGrow supplements. Some kind of contamination. The media's all over it. There's talk of lawsuits, recalls, criminal charges. I didn't feel anything at first. Not anger, not satisfaction, just emptiness. Alara, Rachel, said, "Are you there?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm here." "I thought you should know. I mean, after everything he did to you." "Thanks, Rachel," I said. "I appreciate you telling me." I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time, staring at nothing. I thought I'd moved on. I thought Julian Ashford was just a chapter I'd closed, a man who'd hurt me, abandoned us, and faded into irrelevance. I'd built a life without him. I'd succeeded without him. I didn't need him, and I didn't need revenge. But when I heard his name again, I realized something. Some stories don't end until justice is served, and karma was only just beginning. The night after Rachel's call, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at the screen. Leo was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old oak tree outside. I told myself I didn't care what happened to Julian Ashford. I'd moved on, built a life, succeeded without him. But I needed to know. I typed his name into the search bar, Julian Ashford MaxGrow FDA investigation. Dozens of results appeared. News articles, blog posts, a scathing investigative piece from the Ethelgard Tribune. I clicked the first link and started reading. MaxGrow Wellness, LLC, a supplement company, co-founded by Julian Ashford and Sienna Cole, is under investigation by the Food and Drug Administration following reports that 37 children experienced severe health complications after using the company's flagship product, MaxGrow Kids Formula. Symptoms include nausea, headaches, seizures, and memory impairment. Preliminary tests indicate the presence of lead and mercury in concentrations far exceeding federal safety limits. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tight. 37 children, lead, mercury. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel anger. I just felt empty. I kept reading. Julian Ashford had always believed he was destined for greatness. When he walked away from Alara Mitchell and their newborn son in December 2016, he told himself it was a necessary sacrifice. The boy had Down syndrome. The marriage had been a mistake. Alara was too emotional, too naive, too weak to build the kind of empire Julian envisioned. Sienna Cole, on the other hand, was different. She was sharp, ambitious, ruthless. She didn't cry when things got hard. She didn't ask questions. She made decisions. They'd met in 2015 at a business networking event in Ethelgard, and by mid-2016, they were lovers. By the time Alara was 7 months pregnant, Julian and Sienna had already filed the paperwork to establish MaxGrow Wellness, LLC. The plan was simple: create a line of dietary supplements targeting parents who wanted their children to be smarter, taller, healthier. Market it aggressively. Scale quickly. Get rich. The company launched in January 2017, 1 month after Julian disappeared from Alara's life. The flagship product was MaxGrow Kids Formula, a chewable supplement that promised to unlock your child's full potential. The marketing was brilliant. Testimonials from satisfied parents. Before and after photos of kids who'd supposedly grown 3 inches in 6 months. A sleek website with endorsements from pseudo-experts and influencers. Sales exploded. By 2018, MaxGrow was generating over $1 million in revenue annually. By 2020, it was closer to $3 million. But there was a problem. To keep costs low and margins high, Julian and Sienna sourced ingredients from overseas suppliers who cut corners. The vitamins were diluted, the minerals were contaminated. The quality control was non-existent. They knew the risks. Sienna had flagged them in an internal memo, but Julian made the call: profit over safety. "No one's going to test this stuff," he'd said during a meeting in 2019. "Parents just want to believe they're doing something good for their kids. We give them that belief. That's the product." Sienna didn't argue. She never did. Over the next 5 years, MaxGrow expanded. New products, new markets, a glossy headquarters in downtown Ethelgard with floor-to-ceiling windows and a reception desk made of reclaimed wood. Julian drove a Tesla. Sienna wore designer suits. They appeared in local business magazines as entrepreneurs to watch. And then in February 2017, Sienna gave birth to a daughter. Julian named her Isla. She was perfect. Dark hair like Sienna, bright eyes like Julian, a smile that lit up every room she entered. Julian had never felt this way about Leo. He'd barely looked at the boy before walking out. But Isla was different. Isla was his. She was healthy, intelligent, beautiful. Everything Leo wasn't. He doted on her. Bought her toys, books, clothes she'd never wear. Took her to the office on weekends and let her sit in his chair pretending to be the CEO. Hired a nanny so Sienna could focus on work because Sienna wasn't the nurturing type. She loved Isla in her own way, but motherhood had always been secondary to ambition. "She's your daughter," Sienna would say half-joking whenever Isla cried or needed attention. "You deal with it." And Julian did. Isla became the center of his world. When he looked at her, he didn't see Down syndrome or disappointment or failure. He saw potential, success, proof that he'd made the right choice. Leo was a mistake he'd left behind. Isla was the future he'd chosen. By June 2023, the future was unraveling. The FDA had received 37 reports of children experiencing severe symptoms after using Max Grow Kids formula. Parents were posting on social media. Pediatricians were calling for investigations. A lab in California tested a random sample and found 200 parts per billion of lead, 10 times the federal limit, and 50 parts per billion of mercury, 5 times the limit. The headlines were brutal. Max Grow Wellness accused of poisoning children. FDA launches investigation into popular supplement brand. Parents demand answers after kids fall ill. Julian and Sienna hired lawyers, issued statements, blamed the suppliers, claimed ignorance, but the damage was done. Retailers pulled Max Grow products from shelves. Lawsuits started piling up. Revenue dropped to zero almost overnight. By November, the company was bleeding money. Sienna had stopped coming to the office. Their lawyers were advising them to prepare for criminal charges. Julian spent his days pacing the empty headquarters, staring at the framed magazine covers on the wall, wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. He thought about Alara sometimes. Not often, but enough. He wondered if she'd heard about Max Grow. He wondered if she cared. He assumed she'd moved on, remarried maybe, found someone who could take care of her and the boy. He never imagined she'd succeeded without him. He never imagined she'd built something of her own. Julian Ashford had always believed he was untouchable. But karma doesn't forget, and in 6 months it would come knocking. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. I thought about those 37 children. I thought about their parents who'd trusted a product that promised to help their kids, only to watch them suffer. I thought about Julian sitting in his empty office, drowning in lawsuits and investigations and the consequences of his own greed. And I thought about Isla. She was 7 years old now, the same age as Leo, Julian's perfect daughter, the one he'd chosen over his son. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if Julian would go to prison, or if Max Grow would collapse entirely, or if he'd somehow find a way to escape again. But I knew one thing: in 6 months our paths would cross again. And when they did, he'd realize the boy he abandoned was the only one who could save the daughter he loved. Karma wasn't finished with Julian Ashford. It was only just beginning. By December 2023, the headlines had shifted from investigation to destruction. I sat at my kitchen table again, laptop open, scrolling through the news. Leo was at school. The house was quiet. And for the second time in 2 months, I found myself reading about Julian Ashford's unraveling. Julian Ashford files for bankruptcy following Max Grow collapse. Max Grow co-founder Sienna Cole files for divorce, relinquishes custody of daughter. 47 families sue Max Grow for $50 million in damages. I clicked through the articles slowly. There were photos Julian leaving a courthouse, his face gaunt and hollow. A statement from Sienna's lawyer, Ms. Cole has chosen to focus on her own well-being and will not be seeking custody or visitation rights. A list of assets liquidated: house, cars, office furniture, intellectual property. I didn't know the details. Court records only told part of the story. But I could guess the rest. I'd lived through something similar once 8 years ago when Julian took everything from me. Now it seemed someone had done the same to him. Karma had a long memory. It started in September 2023, 3 months before those headlines. Isla Ashford was 6 years old. She had her father's sharp eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she was Julian's entire world. He'd never loved Leo, never even tried, but Isla was different. Isla was proof that he'd made the right choice. Isla was perfect. Until she wasn't. It began with nausea. Isla complained of stomach pain one morning before school, and Julian assumed it was something she'd eaten. But the next day, it was worse. And the day after that, she couldn't keep any food down. By the end of the week, she was vomiting every few hours, clutching her head and crying that it hurt. Julian took her to the pediatrician, then to a specialist, then to the emergency room. Dr. Sarah Brennan, a pediatric toxicologist at Ethelgard General Hospital, ran a battery of tests. When the results came back, she called Julian into her office and closed the door. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice careful, "your daughter has elevated levels of lead and mercury in her bloodstream, dangerously elevated. We need to know the source immediately. Has she been exposed to contaminated water, old paint? Any supplements or medications?" Julian's mouth went dry. "Supplements," he said quietly. Dr. Brennan leaned forward. "Which ones?" He couldn't say it at first. The words stuck in his throat. But eventually he forced them out. Max Grow Kids formula. The formula he'd created. The product he'd marketed. The supplement that had made him rich. Dr. Brennan's expression didn't change, but Julian saw the recognition in her eyes. She'd read the headlines. She knew what Max Grow was. "How long has she been taking it?" she asked. 2 years, Julian whispered. "Maybe longer." He left the hospital in a daze. Isla stayed overnight for observation, hooked up to IVs that pumped chelation agents through her small veins, trying to pull the poison from her blood. Julian sat in the parking lot and stared at nothing. He'd poisoned his own daughter. By October, everything was falling apart. The lawsuits were piling up. 47 families, all claiming their children had been harmed by Max Grow products. The FDA had issued a formal recall and opened a criminal investigation. The media was relentless. Julian's face was everywhere on the news, in op-eds, in angry social media posts from parents who wanted him in prison. And Sienna had had enough. She came to him one evening in their near-empty house. Most of the furniture was already gone, sold to pay legal fees. They stood in the kitchen, surrounded by boxes, and she told him what she'd decided. "I'm filing for divorce," she said. No emotion, no apology, just a statement of fact. Julian stared at her. "What?" "I've already transferred the joint accounts into my name," she continued. "My lawyer says I have a strong case for separation of assets. You ran the company. You made the decisions." "I was just a partner on paper." "That's not true," Julian said, his voice rising. "You knew about the suppliers. You signed off on everything." "Prove it," Sienna said coldly. She handed him a manila folder. Inside were divorce papers and a custody agreement, or rather, a lack of one. "I'm relinquishing all parental rights to Isla," Sienna said. "You wanted her. You can have her. I'm not going to prison for you, Julian, and I'm not going to waste my life raising a sick child." Julian's hands shook. "She's your daughter." "She's your daughter," Sienna corrected. "I never wanted kids. You did, so take her and get out of my way." She left that night, packed 2 suitcases, called a car, and disappeared. Julian never saw her again. He didn't know where she went. He didn't care. By December, Julian Ashford had nothing. The court had frozen Max Grow's assets pending the criminal investigation. Julian sold the house, the cars, the office equipment. He liquidated everything he could. After legal fees, settlements, and medical bills, he had $120,000 left. It wasn't enough. He'd spent the last 3 months taking Isla to every specialist in Ethelgard. Toxicologists, neurologists, hematologists. They all said the same thing: the damage was severe. The lead and mercury had been in her system for years. Her cognitive development was affected. Her kidneys were struggling. She needed intensive treatment, chelation therapy, monitoring, possibly dialysis if her organs continued to fail, and none of them could guarantee she'd survive. Julian sat in his small rented apartment one night staring at a stack of medical bills. Isla was asleep in the next room. She'd had a seizure that afternoon, her third that week. Doctor. Brennan had told him they were running out of options. There's a hospital in Boston that specializes in pediatric toxicology, she'd said, but it's expensive, and there's no guarantee. Julian had looked into it. The treatment would cost upwards of $400,000. He didn't have $400,000. He didn't have anything. He thought about Leo sometimes. Not often, but in moments like this, when everything was falling apart, the boy would flicker through his mind. 8 years old now. Still alive, probably. Still struggling, probably. Julian had assumed the kid would end up in some state-funded program, a burden on society, a reminder of Julian's worst mistake. He never imagined Leo might be thriving. He never imagined Leo might be the only person who could save Isla. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence. I didn't know if Isla was okay. I didn't know if Julian was desperate enough to come back. But I knew one thing: in less than 3 months, karma would bring him to my door. And when it did, he'd realize the boy he abandoned was the only one who could save the daughter he loved. Late January 2024 was quiet for me. Leo had just turned 8. BioInsight was running smoothly, contracts, renewed new partnerships, forming, revenue climbing. I spent most of my days in meetings reviewing cases Leo flagged and planning for the next quarter. Evenings were for homework, dinner, and bedtime stories, ordinary, peaceful. I didn't know that across the city, a desperate man was typing my company's name into a search bar. I didn't know he was looking for a miracle. And I didn't know that miracle was sitting at the kitchen table finishing his math homework. Julian Ashford's world had shrunk to a single hospital room. Isla had been deteriorating for months, but by January 2024, her condition had become critical. The seizures were happening daily, now violent convulsions that left her exhausted and disoriented. Her kidneys were failing. Her skin had a grayish tint. She slept most of the day, and when she was awake, she cried. Julian had taken her to 5 different hospitals across Athelgard. He'd seen toxicologists, nephrologists, neurologists, pediatric specialists. He'd begged them to try experimental treatments, to consult with colleagues in other states, to do anything. But the answer was always the same. Mr. Ashford, your daughter's case is extraordinarily complex. The lead and mercury levels in her system are beyond anything we've encountered. We don't have a protocol for this. I'm sorry. Julian sat in yet another sterile office, listening to yet another doctor deliver the same verdict. Isla was in a room down the hall, hooked up to monitors and IV drip feeding chelation agents into her bloodstream. It wasn't working. Nothing was working. There has to be someone, Julian said, his voice hoarse. Someone who can help her. The doctor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a tired face, shook his head slowly. If there is, I don't know who. I'm sorry. Julian left the office, walked to the parking lot, and sat in his car for an hour. He stared at the dashboard. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just sat there hollow. Then he pulled out his phone and started searching. He'd been doing this for weeks, scouring the internet for answers. Medical journals, research papers, clinical trials, anything that might give him hope. But tonight his search took him somewhere new, a private forum for medical professionals called MedConnect. He shouldn't have had access to it, but someone had posted a link on Reddit, and Julian clicked through. The forum was filled with doctors discussing rare cases, sharing diagnostic challenges, asking for second opinions. And one thread caught his eye. Undiagnosed congenital heart defect, saved by shadow genius consult, posted by Dr._Stevens_cardio 14 months ago. Julian clicked. I had a case last year that haunts me. 8-month-old infant presenting with respiratory distress. We ran every test, echocardiogram, MRI, blood work. Everything came back normal. 3 pediatric cardiologists reviewed the imaging. No one saw anything wrong. The parents were frantic. The baby was getting worse. I was out of options. Then a colleague suggested I contact BioInsight Analytics, a diagnostic platform based in Ethelgard. They have some kind of AI system, but also a human consultant they call the Shadow Genius. I was skeptical, but I was desperate. I uploaded the imaging files. Within 24 hours, I got a response. The Shadow Genius had identified a tiny arteriovenous malformation in the infant's pulmonary artery, something so subtle it didn't show up on standard imaging. It required a specific angle and contrast adjustment to see. The consultant provided detailed notes, including surgical recommendations. We operated the next day. The baby survived. I don't know who the Shadow Genius is. I don't know how they saw what 3 experienced cardiologists missed. But whoever they are, they saved that child's life. If you have a complex case, I recommend contacting BioInsight. They work miracles. Julian read the post 3 times. Then he scrolled through the replies. Dozens of doctors chiming in, sharing their own stories. A pediatric oncologist who'd consulted BioInsight for a rare tumor. A neurologist who'd used them for a seizure disorder no one else could diagnose. Every story ended the same way: the Shadow Genius got it right. Julian's hands shook as he typed into the search bar BioInsight Analytics Ethelgard. The company's website appeared. Clean, professional, a tagline. Precision diagnostics powered by AI and human expertise. He clicked on Partners and saw a list of hospitals. At the top, St. Michael's Memorial Hospital. Julian closed his laptop and stared at the ceiling. St. Michael's. The same hospital where Isla had been born. The same hospital where he'd once refused to visit his newborn son because the boy had Down syndrome. He didn't believe in signs, but he believed in desperation. The next morning, Julian carried Isla into the emergency room at St. Michael's Memorial. She was unconscious, her small body limp in his arms. The nurses took her immediately, rushing her to the pediatric intensive care unit. Julian followed, answering questions in a daze. Yes, she'd been exposed to lead and mercury. Yes, she'd been deteriorating for months. No other hospital had been able to help. An hour later, Dr. Margaret Hayes appeared. Julian recognized her vaguely. She'd been the director of pediatrics for years. She was in her late 50s with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun and a calm, authoritative presence. "Mr. Ashford," she said, gesturing to a private consultation room, "let's talk." Julian sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Your daughter's condition is critical," Dr. Hayes said. "We're doing everything we can to stabilize her, but I need to be honest with you. This is beyond the scope of what most hospitals can handle." "I know," Julian said quietly. "That's why I came here." Dr. Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Why here specifically?" Julian leaned forward, his voice desperate. "I heard about someone, a consultant. They call them the Shadow Genius. I read that they work with your hospital through BioInsight Analytics. Please, I need you to contact them. My daughter is all I have left. I'll pay anything. I'll do anything. Just, please." Dr. Hayes studied him for a long moment. There was something in his face, grief, guilt, desperation, that she recognized. She'd seen it in parents before. Parents who'd lost everything and were clinging to the last thread of hope. "I can reach out to BioInsight," she said finally. "But I need you to understand the Shadow Genius doesn't take every case. And even if they do, there are no guarantees." "I understand," Julian whispered. "Just please try." Dr. Hayes nodded. "I'll make the call." She stood and left the room. Julian sat alone, his head in his hands. He didn't know that the woman who owned BioInsight was the same woman he'd abandoned 8 years ago. He didn't know that the Shadow Genius he was begging for was the son he'd called a genetic defect. He didn't know anything, but he was about to. I didn't know Julian Ashford had walked back into my life until I saw him in that hallway. By then, Dr. Hayes had already called me. She'd told me about the case, a 7-year-old girl with catastrophic lead and mercury poisoning. She'd asked if Leo could review the imaging. I'd said yes. I always said yes. I didn't know the girl's father was Julian. Not yet. But in a few hours, I'd walk into St. Michael's Memorial and I'd see him. And everything would change. I was still at the hospital 2 hours after Julian threw a $100 bill at my feet. I'd gone to the small office on the 5th floor, the one Dr. Hayes had set aside for Leo and me years ago. It had a desk, a computer, and a couch, where Leo could sit and review cases in private. We'd been there for about 20 minutes when Dr. Hayes knocked on the door. "Lara," she said, stepping inside, "I need to ask you something." I looked up from my laptop. Leo was on the couch, flipping through a medical textbook. "We have an emergency case," Dr. Hayes continued. 7-year-old girl, severe lead and mercury poisoning. The father is desperate. I told him I'd reach out to our consultant. Can Leo take a look? I glanced at Leo. He looked up and nodded. "Send me the files," I said. Dr. Hayes hesitated. "There's something you should know. The father, his name is Julian Ashford." The room went silent. I felt the air leave my lungs. Leo's eyes widened. "Doctor." Hayes knew we'd had an encounter with someone earlier, but she didn't know the full story. She didn't know Julian was the man who'd abandoned us 8 years ago. "Lara," she said carefully, do you know him?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, I know him." Dr. Hayes waited, but I didn't elaborate. After a moment, she nodded. "The little girl is critical. If Leo can help, send me the files," I repeated. She nodded and left. Leo and I sat in silence for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "Mommy, are we going to help her?" "I don't know yet," I whispered. "But we'll look at the case. For the little girl, not for him." Leo nodded. "She's innocent. She didn't choose her father." I pulled him close. "You're right. She didn't." 30 minutes later, we stepped into the hallway outside the pediatric ICU. I was carrying a tablet with Isla's imaging files. Leo walked beside me, his small hand in mine. I'd changed out of the borrowed scrubs and back into my coffee-stained blouse. I wanted Julian to see exactly what he'd done, and then I saw him. Julian was standing near the ICU entrance talking to a nurse. When he saw us approaching, he turned, and his expression shifted from exhaustion to something closer to panic. "Lara," he said, taking a step toward us, "please, I need to apologize. What I said earlier—" "Stop," I said coldly. "I don't want to hear it." Julian's face crumpled. "I didn't know. I didn't realize." He looked down at the coffee stain on my blouse, his hands shaking. "I was stressed and I wasn't thinking and—" "You weren't thinking," I interrupted. "That's your problem, Julian. You never think. You just act and you leave other people to clean up the mess." He flinched like I'd slapped him. Then his eyes landed on Leo. The color drained from his face. That's him, isn't it?" he whispered. "That's Leo." I stepped in front of my son, blocking Julian's view. "Don't you dare say his name. You gave up that right 8 years ago." But Julian wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at Leo, his expression a mixture of shock and something I couldn't quite name. Guilt, regret, maybe even fear. "Leo," he said, his voice trembling, I'm your father. I know I haven't been there. I know I abandoned you. But I want you to know I'm sorry. I was terrified and stupid and You're not my father," Leo said. His voice was calm, steady, far more mature than any 8-year-olds should be. Julian stopped mid-sentence, his mouth still open. "You're not my father," Leo repeated. "You're just a man who shares DNA with me, and right now you need help." He looked up at me. "Mom, we should go." I put my hand on Leo's shoulder, ready to turn and walk away. But then Julian spoke again, his voice breaking. "Wait," he said desperately. "Please, I know I don't deserve your help. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but my daughter, Isla, she's in there and she's dying." His voice cracked. "The doctors said they need the shadow genius. Do you know how I can reach them? Please, I'll do anything." I looked at Leo. He looked back at me, his dark eyes calm and thoughtful. Then I turned to Julian. "We'll see what we can do," I said quietly. "But not for you, Julian, for the child who didn't ask to be born into this mess." Julian's face collapsed in relief. Tears streamed down his cheeks. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you so much. I'll pay whatever it costs. We don't want your money," I said flatly. "We never did." I turned and walked away, Leo's hand in mine. Behind us, I heard Julian's ragged breathing, the sound of a man who'd just realized how far he'd fallen. Julian didn't know it yet, but the person he was begging for the shadow genius was standing right in front of him. And that person was about to make a choice, save the daughter of the man who abandoned him, or walk away just like Julian had done 8 years ago. But I already knew what Leo would choose, because my son was nothing like his father. He was better. Before I reveal what happens next, I need to know, do you think Leo should save Isla, the daughter of the man who abandoned him? Drop your honest opinion in the comments so I know you're still with me. Just a heads up, the following part contains fictionalized elements that may not reflect complete authenticity. If you'd prefer to stop here, feel free to close the video now. That night, Leo sat in his workspace at home, the glow of 2 monitors casting blue light across his face. Doctor. Hayes had sent Isla's medical files through the secure BioInsight portal an hour ago. X-rays, MRI scans, blood work, toxicology reports, everything. I stood in the doorway watching him scroll through the images with the same focus he'd had since he was 3 years old. He didn't look like a child. He looked like someone carrying the weight of a life in his hands. Leo, I said softly, you don't have to do this. He doesn't deserve your help. Leo didn't look away from the screen. I'm not doing it for him, Mom. I'm doing it for Isla. She's innocent. And she's technically my half-sister. I can't let her suffer because of his mistakes. My throat tightened. I walked over and put my hand on his shoulder. You're a better person than I am, I whispered. Leo looked up at me and smiled just a small, sad smile. You taught me that, Mom. I kissed the top of his head and left him to work. He stayed up all night. I checked on him at midnight, then at 2, then at 4. Every time he was still there, hunched over the keyboard, typing notes, zooming in on scans, cross-referencing medical journals. By 5 in the morning, I found him asleep at his desk, his head resting on his folded arms. On the screen was a document titled Diagnostic Report, Isla Ashford, prepared by the Shadow Genius. 15 pages. I scrolled through it quietly. The report was extraordinary, detailed, precise, written in language, both technical and clear. Leo had identified what the other doctors had missed Isla's lead, and mercury poisoning had caused cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. The heavy metals had crossed the blood-brain barrier and were causing acute intracranial pressure. If left untreated for another 48 hours, she would suffer permanent neurological damage or death. He'd outlined a treatment protocol with precise dosages, clinical study references, and a timeline for administration. I clicked send on his behalf and watched the email go to Dr. Hayes. 2 hours later, my phone rang. Alara. Dr. Hayes said, her voice tight with urgency and awe. I just read the report. It's brilliant. He found what we missed. If we follow this protocol, Isla has a real chance. We're starting treatment immediately. But I need to ask, can your consultant be available for real-time guidance? I hesitated. Leo was still asleep, but I knew he'd want to help. Yes, I said. He'll be available. By 9 o'clock that morning, Leo was awake and sitting in front of his computer again. Dr. Hayes had set up a secure video call audio only with a voice modulator on Leo's end. For 6 hours, Leo sat there guiding them through the treatment, adjusting dosages, answering questions, walking the team through every step. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Isla's condition had stabilized. The swelling in her brain had decreased significantly. She was still unconscious, but she was alive. Doctor. Hayes's voice came through the speakers, thick with emotion. It worked. She's going to make it. Thank you. Whoever you are, thank you. Leo leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. You're welcome, he said quietly. An hour later, Dr. Hayes called me again, her tone more serious now. Ilara, I need to see you at the hospital. Please come in and bring Leo. We arrived at St. Michael's an hour later. Doctor. Hayes was waiting in her office, a manila folder on her desk. As part of Isla's treatment protocol, we ran a comprehensive metabolic panel and genetic screening. The lab flagged something unusual, a genetic match in our system. Leo's DNA is in our system because of his work with BioInsight. When Isla's screening ran, the system flagged a sibling match. Full biological siblings, Leo and Isla share both parents. The room tilted. I couldn't breathe. Dr. Hayes looked at me carefully. Did you know? Yes, I whispered. I've always known. Julian abandoned Leo before he was born. He didn't want a child with Down syndrome. He never looked back. Dr. Hayes' face hardened. Then he needs to know now. He has a right to know that the person who saved his daughter's life is his son. 20 minutes later, Dr. Hayes walked into the ICU waiting room where Julian had been sitting for hours. I stayed in the hallway with Leo watching through the glass window. Doctor. Hayes sat down across from Julian and handed him the folder. Julian opened it with shaking hands. I watched his face as he read confusion, then shock, then dawning comprehension. This says Leo and Isla are siblings. That means... Yes, Dr. Hayes said. Leo is your son. Julian's hands went limp. The folder slipped from his grip. Oh my God, he whispered. He's my son. The boy I abandoned is my son. Dr. Hayes' voice was cold and precise. Down syndrome doesn't mean incapable, Mr. Ashford. It just means different, and Leo is extraordinary. He just saved your daughter's life because that's who he is, not because of you, in spite of you. Julian buried his face in his hands and sobbed. I stood in that hallway and watched the man who had destroyed my life fall completely apart. Leo tugged on my hand. Mom, is he okay? No, I said quietly. But he will be. Eventually. I knelt down and cupped his face in my hands. You don't need him to validate you. You never did. Leo nodded slowly. I know. I just saved Isla because it was the right thing to do. Julian Ashford sat in that hospital waiting room clutching a DNA report with trembling hands. He'd spent 8 years running from the son he thought was a mistake. And in one night, that mistake had saved the daughter he loved most. Karma had arrived, and it was only 8 years old. 3 days after Leo saved Isla's life, Julian Ashford sat outside my office at BioInsight waiting. He'd been there for over an hour. My assistant had told him I was in meetings. He'd said he would wait as long as it took. I could see him through the glass wall, slumped in the waiting area chair, unshaven, wearing the same wrinkled shirt he'd had on at the hospital. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days, like a man who'd lost everything. Good, I thought. Now he knows how it feels. But Leo was with me, and Leo had a different perspective. Mom, he said quietly, looking up from the case file he was reviewing. We should talk to him. I turned from my laptop. Why? Because he's drowning, Leo said simply. And even people who've done terrible things deserve a chance to say they're sorry. We don't have to forgive him, but we can listen. I stared at my 8-year-old son, this child who'd been abandoned, insulted, called defective, and wondered how he'd grown into someone so much wiser than me. Okay, I said finally. We'll listen. But that's all. We met Julian in one of the small conference rooms. He stood when we entered, his hands, shaking, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Ilara, he said, his voice breaking. Leo, thank you for seeing me. I know I don't deserve... You're right, I said coldly, cutting him off. You don't. You have 5 minutes. Julian flinched but nodded. He looked at Leo and I saw his face crumple. Leo, I don't even know where to start. I was a coward, a terrible, selfish coward. When I found out you had Down syndrome, I was scared. I didn't know what it meant, so I ran. I convinced myself that leaving was the right thing, that you'd be better off without me. I was better off without you, Leo said calmly. Julian's face went pale. I know you were. And I'm so sorry. I spent 8 years telling myself that what I did was justified. But I was wrong. You saved Isla. You saved my daughter when you had every reason to walk away. You're a better person than I'll ever be. Leo looked at him for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, I didn't save Isla for you. I saved her because she's innocent, because she didn't choose to have a father who poisons children for profit, and because I'm not you, I don't abandon my family. The words hit Julian like physical blows. He staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table. I know, he whispered, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I did. If you'll let me, if you'll give me a chance to... No, I said flatly. Julian turned to me, his eyes desperate. Ilara, please. I know I can't undo the past, but I want to try. I want to be in Leo's life. I want to be a father to him. Leo has everything he needs, I interrupted. He has a home. He has people who love him. He has a future. He doesn't need you showing up now 8 years too late trying to ease your guilt. I stood up, my hands flat on the conference table, and looked him directly in the eyes. The right thing you want to know something, Julian. When I was 28 years old, you called our son a genetic defect. You said he was broken, worthless, a burden you couldn't carry. Today, that defect just fixed the fatal error in your perfect daughter. That broken boy saved Isla's life when 3 different hospitals told you there was no hope. That burden you threw away is the reason your daughter is still breathing. Julian's eyes filled with tears. His hands were shaking. Alara, You're welcome, Mr. Ashford, I said quietly, my voice cutting through his stammering. Now please get out of our lives. The conference room door opened. A woman in a gray suit stepped inside, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. She held up a badge. Julian Ashford, I'm Inspector Sarah Wade, FD, a Criminal Investigations Division. You're under arrest for conspiracy to defraud the FDA distribution of adulterated products and reckless endangerment. Julian didn't move. He just stood there as the officers approached. Inspector Wade pulled his hands behind his back and secured handcuffs around his wrists. We've been building a case against Max Grow Wellness for 6 months. You're looking at 10 to 15 years in federal prison. Julian's legs gave out. One of the officers caught him before he fell. Wait, Julian said desperately. My daughter, Isla. She needs... Your daughter will be placed in temporary custody of Child Protective Services. Her mother has relinquished parental rights and you'll be incarcerated. No, please. She's 7 years old. She just woke up. She's terrified. She needs a parent who didn't poison her, Inspector Wade said coldly. Officers, take him. As they led Julian toward the door, he turned back one last time. Leo, he said, his voice breaking. When Isla wakes up, tell her that you saved her. Tell her that her big brother is a hero. I'll tell her the truth, Leo said quietly. I'll tell her that you made mistakes, and that even people who make terrible mistakes can love their children. Julian's face crumpled. He nodded once, tears streaming down his face, and then the officers pulled him out of the room. We stood in silence after they left. Then Leo looked up at me. Mom, what's going to happen to Isla? I sat down beside him and pulled him close. I don't know yet, sweetheart, but we'll figure it out. 1 week after Julian's arrest, I got the call I'd been waiting for. She's awake, Dr. Hayes said. Isla's awake, and she's asking questions. I was at my desk at BioInsight reviewing quarterly reports. Leo was in the small office next door working on a case. I set down my pen and took a slow breath. What kind of questions? I asked. About her father, about what happened, about the boy who saved her life. I closed my eyes. We'll be there in an hour. Isla Ashford looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. 7 years old, pale, with dark hair spread across the pillow, and Julian's sharp features softened by childhood. An IV line ran into her left arm. Monitors beeped softly beside her. She was awake, though. Her eyes, brown like Leo's, like mine, tracked us as we entered the room. Dr. Hayes stood beside the bed. Isla, sweetheart, these are the people I told you about. This is Ms. Mitchell, and this is Leo. Isla's eyes locked onto Leo. She stared at him for a long moment, her expression serious and searching. You're the one who saved me, she said, her voice small and hoarse. Daddy said before they took him away that you're my big brother. Leo stepped closer to the bed, looking nervous, something I rarely saw in him. Yes, he said quietly. I'm your brother. Half-brother, technically. We have the same father, but different moms, Isla said. Yes. Isla was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, why did you save me? Daddy said you didn't have to. He said you had every reason not to. Leo glanced at me, then back at Isla. Because you're my sister. And because you didn't do anything wrong. You got sick because of choices other people made. That's not fair. So I helped. Are you really 8 years old? Isla asked. Leo nodded. And you have Down syndrome. I do. Isla considered this carefully. Does it hurt? No. Leo said, a small smile crossing his face. It just means my brain works a little differently than other people's. Sometimes that makes things harder, but sometimes it helps me see things other people miss. Isla nodded, slowly processing this. Then she asked the question I'd been dreading. Where's my daddy and my mommy? Why haven't they come to see me? I stepped forward and sat in the chair beside her bed. Isla, honey, your daddy is in a place where he can't visit right now. He made some mistakes and he has to face the consequences. But he wanted me to tell you that he loves you very much. What kind of mistakes? Isla asked. I chose my words carefully. He made products that weren't safe, products that made children sick, including you. Isla's eyes widened. The vitamins, the ones Daddy gave me. Yes, sweetheart. But Daddy said they would make me strong. I know, he didn't mean to hurt you, but he wasn't careful enough and people got hurt, so now he has to take responsibility. Isla was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked very softly, what about my mommy? Where is she? This was harder. I took a breath. Your mother left Isla. I'm sorry, I know that's hard to hear. She doesn't want me anymore. Isla's voice cracked. It's not about you, honey. Sometimes adults make choices that don't make sense, but it's not because of anything you did. Tears welled up in Isla's eyes. So I'm alone now. No, Leo said firmly, stepping closer and taking her hand. You're not alone. You have me, and you have my mom. Isla looked at me, her expression uncertain and fragile. But you don't even know me. I reached out and took her other hand. I know enough. I know you're 7 years old. I know you're brave. I know you've been through something terrible and you survived. And I know you're Leo's sister. That's all I need to know. But where will I go? Isla whispered. When I leave the hospital. I looked at Leo. He nodded encouragingly. You'll come home with us, I said, if you want to. Isla stared at me. You want me to live with you? Yes, I said simply. I do. But why? Isla asked. You don't have to. Because Leo is your brother, I said, and because every child deserves a family. And because I can give you what you need, a home and love, and a chance to be a kid again. Isla's tears spilled over. Can I really stay with you? Yes, I said, squeezing her hand. If you want to. I want to, Isla whispered. I really, really want to. 2 days later, I sat in Rachel Cooper's office signing paperwork. Julian signed the consent forms from prison, Rachel said. He's relinquishing all parental rights. Sienna Cole has been declared an absent parent. The court is expediting the process. You should have temporary custody within a week and full adoption finalized within 6 months. I stared at the form's pages of legal language that all added up to one thing: I was going to be Isla's mother. Are you sure about this? Rachel asked. 2 children, one with special needs, one with trauma. It's not going to be easy. Nothing worth doing is easy, I said, picking up the pen. And yes, I'm sure. I signed my name on the first page, then the second, then the third. With each signature, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of rightness, of purpose, of coming full circle. That evening, I told Leo about the paperwork. We were sitting in the living room, the fireplace crackling softly. Leo was doing homework at the coffee table. I sat down beside him. Leo, I need to talk to you about something important. He looked up, his expression serious. About Isla? Yes. I've started the process to adopt her. She'll be your sister, legally, officially. She'll live with us, forever. Leo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Good. Good, I repeated. Yeah. He smiled, a real, genuine smile. She's innocent, Mom. She didn't ask for any of this. And I always wanted a sibling, someone to teach things to, someone to protect. I pulled him into a hug, my eyes stinging with tears. You're an amazing kid, you know that. You taught me, Leo said simply. The woman Julian Ashford had once called incapable was about to become the mother of both his children. The boy he'd abandoned was about to become a big brother. And the little girl who'd been poisoned by her own father's greed was about to get a second chance at family. Justice, I thought, wasn't just about punishment. Sometimes it was about redemption, too. 3 months after Julian's arrest, I stood in the driveway of our house in Oakmont Heights, watching a social worker help Isla out of the car. She looked so small. 7 years old, wearing a donated dress from Child Protective Services, clutching a stuffed rabbit that Dr. Hayes had given her at the hospital. She had one small backpack. Everything she owned in the world fit into one backpack. Leo stood beside me, holding my hand. He squeezed it gently. "She's scared," he whispered. "I know," I said, "so we'll be patient." The social worker, a kind woman named Mrs. Parker, walked Isla up the driveway. Isla's eyes were wide, taking in the house, the oak tree in the yard, the porch with its hanging flower baskets. "Isla," Mrs. Parker said gently, "this is your new home. This is Miss Mitchell, and you remember Leo from the hospital." Isla nodded but didn't speak. She just stood there gripping her rabbit. I knelt down to her level. "Hi, Isla. Welcome home." Isla's lip trembled. "This is really where I'm going to live." "Yes," I said. "This is your home now, for as long as you want it to be." "Forever," Isla whispered. "Forever," I confirmed. Isla's face crumpled, and suddenly she was crying deep, wrenching sobs that shook her small frame. I pulled her into my arms, and she buried her face in my shoulder. "I don't deserve this," she sobbed. "I don't deserve a nice house and a family. Daddy said I was the reason everything went wrong. He said if I hadn't gotten sick—" "Stop," I said, firmly pulling back to look at her. "Isla, listen to me. What happened to you was not your fault. You didn't ask to be given those vitamins. You didn't ask for any of this. And you deserve every good thing in this world. Do you understand me?" Isla shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But I'm broken, like the vitamins. Daddy broke me." "No," Leo said, stepping forward. "You're not broken, Isla. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken means you can't be fixed. Hurt means you need time to heal, and we're going to help you heal." Isla looked at Leo, her eyes red and swollen. "But what if I can't? What if I'm too damaged?" "You're not," I said gently. "And even if you were, it wouldn't matter, because families don't give up on each other. We'll figure it out together." Isla stared at me for a long moment. Then she whispered, "Can I see my room?" I smiled. Of course. We'd spent the last 2 weeks preparing Isla's room. Leo had helped me pick out furniture, a white bed with a canopy, a small desk by the window, shelves for books. We'd painted the walls a soft lavender. We'd hung fairy lights and put up posters of animals and stars. When Isla walked in, she stopped in the doorway, her mouth falling open. This is mine," she breathed. "All yours," I said. Isla walked slowly into the room, touching everything, the soft comforter, the stuffed animals we'd arranged on the bed, the books on the shelves. She stopped at the desk and picked up a framed photo we'd placed there. It was from the hospital, Leo sitting beside Isla's bed, both of them smiling. Dr. Hayes had taken it the day before Isla was discharged. "We're really brother and sister," Isla said softly, looking at the photo. "We are," Leo said, standing beside her, "and I'm going to be the best big brother I can be." Isla looked up at him. "Will you teach me things like you teach the doctors?" Leo smiled. "I'll teach you whatever you want to learn. Can you teach me to be brave?" Isla asked. "Like you?" Leo thought about this for a moment. Then he said, "I'm not brave because I'm not afraid, Isla. I'm brave because I'm afraid of lots of things, but I do them anyway. And you're already brave. You survived something really scary. You're still here. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." Isla's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were different. Hopeful. "I like it here," she whispered. "Good," I said, "because we like having you here." Over the next few weeks, I watched Isla slowly come back to life. At first, she was quiet, cautious, always asking permission before touching anything or going anywhere. But gradually, she started to relax. She started to laugh. She started to explore. Leo became her constant companion. He showed her his workspace, taught her how to identify different bones on an X-ray, read her books about the human body. Isla hung on his every word, asking endless questions. One evening, I found them in Leo's room, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looking at medical textbooks. "This is a heart," Leo was saying, pointing at a diagram. See these vessels? They carry blood to every part of your body. Your heart was damaged by the lead and mercury. But doctor, Hayes says it's healing. You're getting stronger every day. Isla traced the diagram with her finger. Will I be normal again? You are normal, Leo said firmly. Normal doesn't mean perfect. Normal just means you, and you're exactly who you're supposed to be. Isla looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, People used to say mean things about you, didn't they? Because of your Down syndrome. Yeah, Leo said. They did. What did you do? I proved them wrong. Leo said simply, They thought having Down syndrome meant I couldn't do things. So I did things they said were impossible. I learned. I studied. I helped people. And eventually, some of them realized they were wrong about me. But what about the ones who didn't realize? Isla asked. Leo shrugged. That's their problem, not mine. I know who I am. And that's what matters. Isla nodded slowly, absorbing this. I want to be like you when I grow up. You don't have to be like me, Leo said, smiling. You just have to be the best version of you. 2 months after Isla moved in, we were having dinner together, the three of us around the kitchen table talking about our day. Isla was telling us about a book she'd read at school, gesturing animatedly with her fork. Halfway through the story, she paused, looked at me, and said, Mom, can I have more juice? The room went quiet. Isla froze her eyes, going wide. I'm sorry. I didn't mean I shouldn't have. It's okay, I said softly, my eyes stinging with tears. You can call me Mom if you want to. Isla's face crumpled. Can I really? Really, I said. Isla got up from her chair and ran to me, throwing her arms around my neck. Thank you, she sobbed. Thank you for taking me. Thank you for wanting me. I held her close, tears streaming down my face. You're my daughter now, Isla. You always will be. Leo came over and wrapped his arms around both of us, and we stayed like that for a long time, the three of us holding each other, a family built not on blood, but on choice. In 6 months, the adoption would be finalized. Isla would officially become Isla Mitchell, part of a family built on love, not just genetics. Julian had thrown her away just like he'd thrown Leo away. But we'd caught her, and we'd keep her safe. Forever. 6 months after Julian's arrest, a letter arrived at our house. I recognized the return address immediately. Federal Correctional Institution, Ethelgard. Inmate number 47,829. Julian Ashford. I stood in the kitchen holding the envelope, debating whether to open it or throw it away. Leo walked in, saw the letter, and stopped. Is that from him? He asked quietly. Yes. Are you going to read it? I hesitated. Then I handed it to Leo. I think it's for you. Leo took the envelope, carefully studied it for a moment, then set it on the kitchen table. I'll read it later, when I'm ready. That evening, after Isla had gone to bed, Leo came to me with the letter now opened. His face was calm, unreadable. What did it say? I asked. Leo handed me the letter. You should read it. I unfolded the pages, 3 sheets of prison stationery covered in Julian's careful handwriting. Dear Leo, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if I have any right to write to you at all. But Dr. Hayes told me that you and Isla are living together now with your mother. She told me that you're happy, that Isla calls Alara Mom, that you're teaching Isla about medicine, about being brave, about being kind. I can't tell you how much that means to me. Not because I deserve to feel anything good, I don't, but because it means Isla has what I could never give her, a real family. People who will love her, not because she's perfect, but because she's hers. I've had 6 months in here to think about what I did. To you, to Alara, to Isla, to all those children whose lives I destroyed because I was greedy and careless and convinced myself that profit mattered more than people. I don't have excuses. I was a coward. When I found out you had Down syndrome, I was terrified. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know how to handle it. So I ran. I told myself it was the right thing, that you'd be better off without me. But the truth is, I was the one who couldn't handle it. I was weak, and I let my fear turn me into something monstrous. When I saw you at the hospital, when I realized the boy I'd abandoned had grown into someone extraordinary, I felt something I'd never felt before. Shame. Real, crushing shame. Not because you have Down syndrome, but because I'd let that define you in my mind. Because I'd looked at you and seen only limitations when you were capable of things I'll never understand. You saved Isla's life. You saved my daughter when you had every reason to let her die. You did it because you're a better person than I'll ever be. And I'll spend the rest of my life knowing that the son I threw away is the reason my daughter is still alive. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry and that I'm grateful and that even though I have no right to say this, I'm proud of you. I hope you and Isla and Alara have the life you deserve, the life I was too broken to give you. Julian. I set the letter down, my hands shaking. Leo, are you okay? Leo was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want to write back. You don't have to, I said gently. You don't owe him anything. I know, Leo said, but I want to, not for him, for me. Leo spent the next hour at his desk writing carefully. When he was finished, he brought the letter to me. Can you read it? He asked. To make sure it's okay. I took the pages and read. Mr. Ashford, I received your letter. I read it 3 times, and I've thought a lot about what to say back. You called me a genetic defect 8 years ago. You told my mother I was a burden. You walked away because you were scared of what I might become, and you spent 8 years convincing yourself you'd made the right choice. Then I saved Isla, and suddenly you realized I wasn't what you thought I was. But here's what you need to understand. I didn't save Isla to prove anything to you. I didn't do it so you'd feel guilty or so you'd realize you were wrong about me. I did it because Isla is my sister, and she didn't deserve to suffer because of your mistakes. You say you're proud of me. You don't get to be proud of me. You weren't there when I learned to walk. You weren't there when I learned to read. You weren't there when I stayed up all night studying medical journals because I wanted to help people. You weren't there for any of it. My mom was there. Dr. Hayes was there. Rachel was there. They're the ones who get to be proud, not you. You're not my father. You're just a man who shares DNA with me. And honestly, that doesn't mean anything to me anymore. You asked if I forgive you. I don't. But not because I'm angry. I just don't think about you enough to hold on to anger. You're not important enough to me to waste energy hating. Isla is happy now. She has nightmares sometimes, and she still asks about you. But she's healing. She has a family who loves her. She has a brother who will protect her. She has a mother who will never abandon her. She has everything you couldn't give her. You said the best revenge isn't cruelty, it's indifference. You're right. So here's my revenge. I don't care about you. I don't think about you. You're just a cautionary tale I'll tell someday about what happens when people let fear make their choices. Isla and I are going to be fine. Better than fine. We're going to have the life we deserve. And you'll spend the next decade in prison knowing that the genetic defect you threw away became everything you never could be. That's not cruelty, that's just the truth. Goodbye, Mr. Ashford. Leo Mitchell. I set the letter down, tears streaming down my face. Leo, I whispered, this is perfect. Leo nodded. Can we mail it tomorrow? Yes, I said, we can mail it tomorrow. The next day I walked with Leo to the post office. He dropped the letter in the mailbox himself, then turned to me. Mom, he said, I feel lighter. Good, I said, pulling him into a hug. You should. We walked home together, leaving the past behind us with every step. The best revenge, I realized, isn't cruelty. It's indifference. It's building a life so full of love and purpose that the people who hurt you become irrelevant. Julian Ashford had spent 8 years running from his son, and now his son didn't even think about him anymore. That I thought was justice. June 2025. 6 months after Leo mailed his letter to Julian, I stood in a courtroom for the last time. Judge Maria Thornton looked down at the 3 of us from her bench, me in my navy suit, Leo in his button-down shirt and tie, Isla in the lavender dress we'd picked out together. Her small hand gripped mine tightly. Ms. Mitchell. Judge Thornton said, I've reviewed the case thoroughly. The psychological evaluations, the home study reports the testimonies from Dr. Hayes, the school, and Child Protective Services. Everything indicates that Isla has thrived in your care over the past year. A year. It had been a full year since that day at the hospital when Julian threw coffee on me, a year since Leo saved Isla's life, a year since everything changed. Isla, Judge Thornton said gently, do you understand what's happening today? Isla nodded, her voice clear and strong. Yes, Your Honor, Ms. Mitchell is adopting me. She's going to be my mom, officially. And is that what you want? Yes, Isla said without hesitation. More than anything. Judge Thornton smiled. Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Athelgard, I hereby grant Alara Mitchell full and permanent custody of Isla Ashford, henceforth to be known as Isla Mitchell. She brought down her gavel with a decisive crack. Congratulations, Ms. Mitchell. You now have 2 children. Isla turned to me, her eyes wide. Does this mean you're officially my mom now? I knelt down and cupped her face in my hands. Yes, sweetheart, officially and forever. Isla threw her arms around my neck. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby, I whispered, holding her close. Leo came over and wrapped his arms around both of us. Welcome to the family, sis. Officially. The 3 of us stood there in that courtroom holding each other, and I felt something I hadn't felt in 8 years complete. That evening, after everyone left our celebration, after the dishes were washed and the house was quiet, I found Leo and Isla in the backyard. They were sitting under the oak tree, looking up at the stars. I walked over and sat down between them. What are you 2 doing out here? I asked. Looking at constellations, Leo said. I'm teaching Isla. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Isla said, Mom, do you ever think about before? When it was hard, I considered this carefully. Sometimes. Why? Because I think about before sometimes, Isla said quietly, when I was sick, when Daddy was arrested, when I thought I was going to be alone forever. And then I remember that you chose me. You didn't have to, but you did, and it makes me feel safe. I pulled her close. You are safe, sweetheart. You'll always be safe with us. I know, Isla said. That's why I can think about the scary parts now, because they're over. I looked at my 2 children, so different, so similar, both so incredibly wise, and felt my heart expand. You know what, I want to tell you both something. They turned to look at me, waiting. Leo, you are my miracle. 8 years ago, when you were born, people told me I couldn't do it. They said you'd be a burden, but you weren't. You were a gift. You taught me to be strong. You taught me that different doesn't mean less. And Isla, you are my second chance. You came into our lives when you were broken and scared, and you trusted us to help you heal. You let us love you, and in doing that, you completed our family in a way I didn't even know was missing. Both of them were crying now, but smiling too. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you both know how loved you are, how wanted you are, how extraordinary you are. We know, Mom, Leo said softly. You show us every day. I thought about the woman I'd been 8 years ago, 25 years old, alone, terrified, holding a newborn baby everyone said would ruin my life. If I could go back and tell her anything, I'd tell her this. It's going to be hard, harder than you can imagine. There will be nights when you cry yourself to sleep, days when you don't know if you can keep going. But you will. You'll keep going because that's what mothers do. And 8 years from now, you'll be watching 2 incredible children who call you Mom, and you'll realize you didn't just survive, you thrived, and so did they. Mom, Isla said softly, what are you thinking about? I looked at her, then at Leo, then back at the fading light. I'm thinking that we made it. Made it where? Leo asked. Here, I said simply. To this moment, to this family. Against every odd, despite every obstacle, we made it. Leo reached over and took my hand. Isla took the other. And we sat there, the 3 of us, as the stars began to appear. A family built not on genetics, but on choice. Not on obligation, but on love. Julian Ashford made his choice 8 years ago. He chose fear over love, and he lost everything that mattered. I made my choice too. I chose love over fear, and I gained everything. 2 children who are extraordinary in completely different ways. A life built on purpose and compassion. Proof that the people who hurt you don't get to define you. Only you get to define yourself. And we, Leo Isla and I, defined ourselves as a family. That's not just survival, that's victory. Looking back on this journey, I realize family betrayal cuts deeper than any wound. When Julian abandoned Leo, it wasn't just family betrayal, it was a choice to let fear define him. And when he built Maxgrow on lies poisoning children, including his own daughter, that family betrayal became something darker, a betrayal of humanity itself. But here's what I learned: family revenge isn't about cruelty. Real family revenge is building a life so full of love that the people who hurt you become irrelevant. My family revenge was proving that the incapable woman could raise not 1, but 2 extraordinary children. If I could offer advice to anyone facing family betrayal, don't become like the people who hurt you. Don't let their choices poison your future. Choose love over fear always. I'm not particularly religious, but I believe God, or the universe, or whatever you call the force that guides us, gives us exactly the challenges we need to become who we're meant to be. Leo wasn't a burden, he was my purpose. The lesson: you're not defined by the people who abandon you. You're defined by how you rise. Different isn't broken, it's beautiful. And sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. What would you do in my situation? Would you have taken in your ex-husband's daughter after everything he did? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Your support means everything. Thank you for staying with us until the end. This story contains fictionalized elements created for educational purposes. If this content isn't for you, feel free to explore other videos on our channel that might resonate better.